The college basketball conference season is well underway, and we are going to go to maybe the bluest of bloods, one of the very most exciting teams in the country, the Kentucky Wildcats, and find out how many and how high their prospects should go in this year's NBA draft, and look at the SEC as a whole. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. And you can call me Chuck. This is episode number 192. Episode number 191 was last week. That was with Shamit Dua of Fear the Brown. He's a credentialed reporter with the New Orleans Pelicans. Shamit and I both have a great fondness for that team. So we talked in depth about how well the Pelicans have been playing, sort of the maybe internal tension of how that team has gone about finding its way, how clear the path is moving forward, some trade targets they might have. Just a very deep dive on that organization. And we finish it off with an ode to our guy, Trey Murphy III. But today, we obviously are back firmly in the draft waters. And to help me talk Kentucky is a first-time guest that I'm very honored to have. It is Kyle Mann, or J. Kyle Mann, for those who follow him, for The Ringer. One of obviously the bigger names in the space, a gentleman whose reputation precedes him both as a purveyor of audio and video content, but also for his love for the Kentucky Wildcats. So, Kyle, without any further ado, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for that nice intro. Yeah, you can the Kyle J Kyle man thing. I always tell people, the J's there just to distinguish me from the Babylon B guy, basically. So I never went for by that growing up because I definitely early on had some people who saw that and were like, "What the fuck, dude? You do like?" They thought that was me too, and I was like, "It's not me." So went with the J Kyle. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that like the Kentucky thing preceding me. It's like a hilarious, you and I were talking off pod about um roots to this industry and this industry in general and things like that. And early on, I remembered thinking like maybe I'll keep the Kentucky thing just to myself. I'll keep it quiet. And I thought I was a little like conservative about it in the beginning, and people still picked up on it. They picked up on it even through the choices of subject matter. They were like, "Oh, I think this guy's a Kentucky fan." Shit, they started getting, and I definitely did get some of that reaction, like, "Dang it, you're a Kentucky fan." But I try to just be vulnerable about it and not be crappy. I do some playful trash talking here and there, but as long as you're not obnoxious and you're playful, people are typically pretty cool, and that's what we try to do. Tate and I do on One Shining Podcast. Um, you know, that's but the cat's out of the bag. I think everybody knows when you
Oh
think
man,
when
and
you think of
what
me.
a lovely pun. Look at you. Now, I think
I
on
didn't
the
even mean
left
to do that, but there we go.
on the scale of possible obnoxiousness when it comes to their fan base, I think you are pretty low on that scale. I have never had that reaction to anything that you have written or said about your Wildcats. But yeah, man, I mean, trying to hide it is like trying to hide where you're from or trying to hide an accent. It's like people will know, and might as well just lean into it. I live in Texas. I didn't grow up in Texas, and
You said you grew up in New Jersey. Is that what you said?
that's right. The
Okay.
great, the great state.
Okay.
And I don't think I have much of a Jersey accent, but I definitely have a I'm not from Texas accent, and I guess sort of cadence to the way I speak. So that, it is what it is. It's fine. It's fine. I grew up a New York Knicks fan once upon a time, but
Oh, I'm
I,
sorry. Yeah.
I'm all
It's
right,
not so bad
man.
now. It's not so bad now.
Not so bad now. I mean, they've got their own Wildcat High from Villanova, but they like I thought that by getting into the draft space, that would be sort of a nice way of floating away from my Nick fandom because everything with Dolan had just worn on me for so long. And to a degree it has, but you catch the right game at MSG on League Pass or whatever, and it burbles. Stuff gets the stew gets to cook a little bit. So
Hmm.
why deny it at some point? But let's talk Kentucky. let's talk Kentucky, and let's talk in specific Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham, who are, I think, pretty clearly at this point the two highest profile Kentucky prospects this year. What is so lovely about this year's NBA draft is the wide variety of opinion and placement of everyone, really. And I've seen, I think, Bleacher Report, Jonathan Wasserman had either a mock or a top 100, I don't remember, where he had Dillingham as high as number 3. Both he and Sheppard have really, really strong
Proponents, yes.
really strong proponents. And so I wanted to know, just kicking it off, uh, who do you want to start with, first of all? Who would you rather discuss first?
We could start with Dillingham if you want.
Okay. Let's start with Rob Dillingham. Rob is averaging, I didn't add in his games tonight, but right around 15, 4, and 4, that neighborhood, is shooting 47% from the field, 42 from 3, just under 80% from the line. And both he and Sheppard, both these guys are guards, come off the bench, very notably. Something that I think was the design early in the season, and they just have won most of their games. So Calipari hasn't seen a real need to go off of that. But Rob and Reed are such good compliments to one another, because Rob is more of the sort of electric live dribble creator and ball handler. I mean, when he comes in, he's not just a spark plug in terms of getting shots up, but he sort of changes the whole tone of their offense, the whole tone of a game. So his, the first pushback people have on Rob as a prospect is his size, because he's around 6'1", 6'2", with a wingspan basically to match that. Nothing outlier like Emmanuel Quickley was once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you believe he stacks up to this lineage of Kentucky guards in the Cal era? Quickley, Maxey, Murray, these guys who had some slipperiness or electricity with the ball in their hands. How does that sort of manifest itself in Rob's game?
I would say if you look back, if you want to look at it through like the Cal era, you're talking about the Kentucky guards that are in the league right now. Honestly, the way basketball has changed in the last few, since I guess 20, that frame of guards actually kind of lines up with the way basketball has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look, it's a pretty, using those guys as sort of a prism to talk about what is applicable, what would translate, what's going to work, how to envision them translating to the pro game. That stuff all works. If you look at Rob, comparing him directly, if I were to say, okay, is there a high point that he has, if you were comping them, laying them out against each other, in terms of being an advantage creator, drawing two, getting into the lane, breaking people down purely just with his handle. He's a very cat-like kind of athlete. I'm always really curious and interested in these athletes that have very fluid movements that kind of segue from one to another. You'll watch a guy, if you compare him to like DJ is very like, here's a movement, stop, here's another movement, stop, here's another movement. Rob is very like, everything he does has a nice, just, I hate overusing the word fluidity, but there's connectivity between each, in video games they used to call them anims, like it was like a specific movement. He just stacks combinations of things together very seamlessly, and you don't really see him over his skis. Early in the summer, when they went to Canada, you did kind of see that. You saw him for the first time be like, oh, I'm going to feel a body here that is, I'm not as superior to athletically that I was in the past. And this person weighs a lot more than me, and I'm not able to get to my spots. He goes back in the summer or in the fall, gets stronger. And I think you've seen that. I guess if you were going to pick an analog for him, just in terms of like where he could go, it's a little tough, because I think in terms of the athleticism I described, the physical characteristics, He does, I said before the season, remind me a little bit of Malik Monk in the terms of the
Mm.
sinewiness of his body, but he's not as tall as Malik is the problem. He has a sort of like get in the gap, score, bucket getter kind of a thing that is sort of like Maxi, but I think he's a better live dribble shooter and passer than Maxi at the same stage. But again, he's a little smaller. Like Maxi could get in the lane and create separation. His middle game was really crafty. When Rob gets in the middle of the lane, it's either he's taking that kind of wild kick his foot out jumper, which Cal has kind of choked a lot of those out of him, at least at this stage. I'd have to check the shot chart on that to be absolutely sure, but it seems like it. And then yeah, I'm trying to think. You mentioned Quickly. He doesn't have Quickly, the super long arms, I think is really underrated with Quickly.
Yep.
Let me pull up just a list just so I make sure I don't miss anybody. Um,
I mean, the SGA would probably be the standard for fluidity when you're talking about
that's true.
being able to chain things together. But I mean, he's also super long arm, much bigger, that sort of thing. But I think the comparison to Monk is interesting because Malik has settled into this sort of very solid, valuable, perennial sixth man of the year kind of identity in the NBA. Certainly has found a home with Sacramento. I think is in line for a very good extension or payday this offseason. But took him a long while to find his footing in the league. And he also, I think he is more in my mind of like the prime example of like an electric microwave college freshman scorer. Uh, Even though he showed passing flashes, it just seemed like he was wired, not just wired mentally, but wired physically with sort of a more built out frame, a bit, stronger torso to just sort of force contact, get to the rim, explode off his feet, and really threaten with scoring first.
Mm-hmm.
What I really like about Rob is, the connectivity that you mentioned. His threats are more balanced. I think that he can use the threat of his ability to shoot off the dribble, and a defender will not know whether or not to respond to that threat or the threat of a live dribble skip or a hesitation move to get to his spot. I just think all of it interacts in a more unpredictable way, which is what, to me, when I look at him and I compare him not only to past Kentucky guards, but just past prospects in any draft since I've been covering it, which is, a handful of years, that's the quality that sticks out the most to me with him, is that even though he doesn't have Quickly's arms, his arms seem longer than they are because he has such control of the ball
Mm-hmm.
when he is on offense, and he can operate at such not just like quickness, but he can operate with such suddenness about, you, it's almost like the old like Pete Maravich instructional tapes where he's like, what I would do is I'd move my hands here and I'd flick my wrist and the ball would go the other way. And you're like, well, four people in the history of the world are able to do that, Pete. But
Yeah.
it seems like Rob has a little bit of that where he can manipulate the ball very late in his movement, and it constantly puts their offense in really, really good spots.
Yeah, Ben Taylor and I have actually talked a lot about this, which is these window widening kind of guys who can stretch a play to the very, very end of its like, almost like a measure in music. Like they can wait until the very last 30-second beat of the measure and then make the decision. Like and a lot of that is tied to what you were talking about, the scoring threat. You're really not able to do that if you're not a scoring threat.
Right.
So, and especially if you're a live dribble. So that speaks to kind of what you're describing, I think. And when I think about him, I think my mind drifts towards scoring because it always seems like that is the wild animal in him that is trying Cal's been trying to cage throughout the season. And the thing and I don't blame Cal for this, is that like, Rob needs to be safe from himself just a little bit, but I also will turn around and give him some credit. I want to talk a little bit about Monk in a second in terms of like applicability, how to use those types of players, I think is what this whole conversation is. But
Mm-hmm.
um I will give Rob credit, and I've said this maybe other places, so bear with me if I'm repeating myself, but it reminds me a little bit of the way LaMelo went from Spire Academy to the NBL, where we were like, the buzz started, and if people don't remember, it's easy to forget this if you're newer to the NBA draft coverage. It's like, LaMelo was this crazy social media star, clearly just very, very just like balls to the wall, incredible live dribble talent. But people didn't take him seriously. He was kind of I always compare it to the Johnny Cage thing from the Mortal Kombat movie, which you may be old enough to remember this. They were like, we know this guy can fight, but he's a movie star. Is he really a real fighter? It was kind of that thing, and that's what it always reminded me of. And I was like, LaMelo goes. LaMelo goes over. Adaptability is a big thing for me with players. I want to see that you're soaking things up. There are a lot of ways you can kind of pick up on that. I want to see that you can learn quickly, basically. And with LaMelo, he goes to the NBL. He plays a few games over there, and you realize like this guy knows how to play basketball. It was like
Mhm.
an immediate. We'd never really seen that. We'd seen him dick around in Lithuania, in all the different settings that he'd been in, and he was so talented that it didn't matter. Rob had a little bit of that. Rob was like so talented that I saw him in EYBL a few times, and he was just kind of cruising around out there. Clearly, was thinking ahead of everyone else. Was like a few steps ahead. Could kind of do whatever he wanted. He never you never really saw him sweating or sweating it at all. And he comes to Kentucky, and it was clear immediately that it was like, oh, this guy like understands that he's in a different setting. Either he's
Mhm.
being mentally stimulated in a way that's interesting him for the first time because he's so skilled. But that has been refreshing for me. You were talking about Monk, though. I want to throw it back to that. Using making these guys work is the question, because is he going to be a consistent like rim pressure threat? I know he can get in the middle of the lane. Will he be able to do that like efficiently? I don't know, on a consistent basis where you would trust him with any kind of volume. But if you look at the way Malik's usage changed, and I have it in front of me here, the play type usage over the years, huge spike in handoffs and cuts in his
Mhm.
Sacramento years, huge spike. So to me, I think that's the ideal way. I feel like the NBA is drifting this way in general already. Using quick guards, the Warriors kind of got this going with their off ball action kind of stuff. It's harder to guard the thing. It's harder. The more you can stress communication away from the ball so the whole defense can't have their eyes set on where it's coming from.
Sure.
Um, I think Rob is probably going to thrive if he has a player like that. I think he's doing really well at Kentucky because Trey Mitchell is a nice pairing for him, a nice connective passer.
Mhm.
Nash had Boris Diaw. It's always just nice to have a guy like that if you have a not physically dominant ball handler who can kind of come on and off of them. So that was sort of a long-winded answer there, but yeah, Rob has impressed me in the early goings of the year in a big way.
Yeah, and like jumping ahead to his NBA role, with that comparison to Malik, like the odds are that he is not going to be entrusted with sort of the tray menu, where he's had all the usage he could ever want for now 5 years before things are, really reaching their breaking point in Atlanta. Like
Mhm.
he will play with a bigger guy who will likely be a number one option, and Rob will play off of that. That will also stress Rob's ability to contribute on defense because obviously the less a team relies on you on offense, the more it will ask of you on defense. And I want to get to his defense, but I I think that even though Cal has, I think with reason, tried to sort of mold his game, and he's stuck to him being a guy who comes off the bench but closes in any sort of tight scenario, him and Reed both. Uh, he really strikes me as someone where if he were in a heliocentric system of 5 years ago in a college team where he had some spacing and he had a center who could really squash people and he could run high pick and roll. I mean, his numbers he would be over 20 a game very easily to
Yeah.
me. And as, a freshman who could really control a game from beginning to end. And I think though the point about LaMelo, even in Australia, Now that's a pro league, different level of opponent and all that stuff. Like his team was not good, and you could see the experimentation in real time that LaMelo was doing because he was, really pumping up his 3-point volume, and his though he could get deflections on the defensive end, that would really wax and wane. Like it was still LaMelo world, so to speak, but in a more sort of professional environment. With
Mhm.
Rob, maybe you can speak to this. I don't see Rob, apart from gambling off the ball for steals, which he does a lot. He likes to crowd ball handlers as a helper. He has a 3.5 steal rate, which is very, very good. But there's some recklessness in there, which I
Mhm.
don't really worry about as a freshman. But like apart from that, I think that he is very conscious of what like efficient winning plays are. And I don't really see him taking the team out of the flow of what they are doing in order to get his shots up. What do you think about his ability to fit in with what the team has asked him to do? And how sort of sustainable do you think that is for the rest of the year?
I think it's sustainable. I think he's already the baseline that he's established, I think, has been really good and surprising, honestly. But you always kind of just walk that line with him between he does have an appetite to kind of get going and go get his and create. Um, I think they've done a pretty good job bottling it most of the time. You'll see him in late clock situations. You'll see him in a situation like against Texas A&M where they were like they needed some quick buckets. They needed somebody to go create one. He'd
Yeah.
been ice cold the whole game. He comes out there and hits three. And, you're thinking the guy hasn't made a shot all game. It's like really, is this where we're gonna go? It's just kind of like I don't know. I don't even know what to compare it to. It's just sort of like a bet that could bankrupt you or make you rich, basically, in some of those situations with him. But yeah, I mean, he's been a better dribble shooter from three than I expected. He's a pretty physical finisher going to his right. He outlasts guys in the air. He does this thing where he kind of cups the ball when he
Hmm.
goes up. I don't think he has big hands really, but he'll get to the basket, sort of cup it, hit people in a way to intentionally outlast them, and then just sort of like bring it up and finish high off the glass. He's great using the glass. He has some of that kind of New York glass usage in his game, that finishing kind of the school of Kyrie kind of thing going on
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah, I was looking at other kind of body types on this, like on the season finder here, just to see if there's anybody else that he really reminds me of in terms of the people that really play a lot. Um, yeah, I mean, you're looking at a lot of these guys kind of have physical components, like body type to like live dribble. I mean, Darius Garland is such a skilled shooter and passer in a lot of different ways. Body type wise, they're not that different, honestly.
Hmm.
If I'm looking at, yeah, I wouldn't go and say that he's like a I'm just kind of going through here. There's not really a great match, to be honest with you. That's one that kind of makes sense. I mean, you hear people talk about Lou Williams. Um, it's somebody that I think is going to be used as. Watch, I say this, and he's going to go be a star. But I have a feeling I have a tendency to underestimate Kentucky guards at times, even if I do like them. Like I was really, really high on Shea, higher than a lot of people, and I still underestimated him.
Well, everyone.
But everybody did.
Very hard to correctly estimate Shea, but yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know what percentage of people even got that one right, but exactly right anyway. But I mean, there's a little Dennis Schroeder in him, but he's a better shooter than Schroeder in terms of like
Hmm.
slinky body. But yeah, I mean, those are just a few of the other guys that because a lot of the other like dribble pull up shooter guys are solidly built, like your Brunsons, your
Hmm.
Lillards. Those are guys who can kind of plant, a shoulder and hip into you, make some space and hit a shot. Even Cole Anthony is a pretty powerful athlete. The
I
slinky
th-
guys his size, I don't have a great match for him.
well, I think if apart from the wingspan, I think he and Quickly have certain similarities in how they go about getting their stuff. But I think that even though Quickly is such a good and decisive complementary piece and off-ball player, like everything he does is, very on it. I didn't want to say quick, but it is. Uh Dillingham, I think, is just I watch his handle and I'm just like, this is an elite at what he does. He is very unique. Like he does not have much company in how good he is at what he does.
Hmm.
And like this is a draft where you're gonna, everyone is gonna fall in and out of love with people because there's so little consensus at the top. And you know, I can certainly understand not putting Rob right at the top of the class because, how a 6'1" guard, how do they possibly return that level of value? And I think Rob is probably unlikely to return top 5 value, but I don't think he is far off from that. I think it is very, very likely that he's going to be an efficient offensive player in the league relatively soon. And I think if he plays off of the right guy, betting on feel and shooting and manipulation, I mean, it very rarely craps out. It tends to sort of overproduce. And it's
Hmm.
that manipulation that you started off talking about with him. Like it's he just is so slippery, but not slow. There are slippery guys who are like very deliberate and very frustrating, but everything he does is so sudden. And that's
Hmm.
why, like, even though some stuff is caged, to use your term, I would like to see him completely, left to his devices. I want to see what it looks like because I want to see what it looks like when someone can really bottle him up. Like, have you seen there have been games where his numbers have not been very good, but have you
Hmm.
seen a defender like clearly outclass him to where he was constantly put in uncomfortable situations on offense so far this year?
You know, I don't know that I've seen anybody like take him as an individual matchup and really I'd have to go back and look at that just from memory. I can't really remember one in particular. He didn't have a great game. Usually he kind of beats himself if he's going to beat if somebody, it's usually
Right.
maybe didn't pick his spot exactly right, maybe just was a little overeager here or there, just kind of was feeling because he's played some pretty good defensive guards already earlier in this season and done pretty well. I mean, of course, Miami has turned out to be pretty mediocre overall. I mean, nobody could check him on that team. It was insane. Of course, but then I'm trying to think of somebody else, if anybody else really bothered him. At Florida, he had a rough kind of a stinker, but that's just kind of the way it goes with him. It's very, very on or off. Like tonight, it looked like he could just do whatever he wanted at any time.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. No, I don't know if there's one that really comes to mind, honestly. We could look at the schedule. Is there anything that popped out to you? Is there a guy that you saw that bothered?
No, not anything. And like Florida's a nice example because they have a lot of either athletic guards or like very solid defensive guards. Zion Pullen is a very solid
Hmm.
guard defender. Will Richard is a very solid guard defender. So there's bodies to throw at them. They also had size in the front court of that game. But I I very rarely see him, and maybe we'll get in the latter part of this episode elsewhere in the SEC to like Dalton Connect. Dalton's played a lot of like Tennessee's played a very hard schedule, but I've seen defenders give him a lot of problems because he doesn't have the burst or the manipulation or whatever that someone like Rob does. And that's just if there is something to bet on apart from his ability to literally shot make, obviously, which you need. But if there is a star bet on him, it is that when he is whatever 24 years old in the NBA in 5 years and he's gotten all those reps and he has all this space and he has all these options to pass to, either as a connector or as a higher volume guy, that his understanding of the game will carry him. And I think, like, I mean, maybe a bit of an outdated term, but his unselfishness, like, I really don't think that he is wired to say that everyone needs to take a back seat to him. He seems like he
Yeah, I don't
really
see that at
wants to
all.
win. Yeah. So I just think that once he has all of that sort of wired up and repped out, he could be like, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers would look like, but like I think Garland is a good comparison for what the productivity could be. And I think Garland is someone who is sort of begged to have a bigger initiator to play with and play off of that he hasn't quite gotten yet in Cleveland. You know, he has Donovan, but that's
That's
not quite the same thing. What do you think about that, though?
Oh, well, I was looking at his listing on Basketball Reference, and he's at 6'3", and I'm like, I don't know if that's right. He's 6'2" on CBB Analytics. I'm like, I'd like to know exactly what his measurements are. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
gone to try to hunt those down, but um, the Garland thing's interesting. I mean, just as a thought experiment, if you went back, why is it that we were so sure that Darius Garland was like a top 10 pick in a draft that was perceivably better? We'll see if it pans out to be that way. But like, um, why is it that we were so excited about Garland, but we're hesitant about Dillingham? You know, that's an interesting kind of thing to ponder. Because the more you were talking about it, I was like, he is a pretty good. I mean, Garland's passing probably got a little underrated coming into that draft.
Mm-hmm.
We knew he was a quick shooter. We knew he could shoot with movement. We knew he could like really ratchet it up fast as you want to go. He can still shoot the ball. We knew he could shoot off the dribble. Rob has a lot of similar characteristics, honestly. So it kind of makes you wonder, like, what is the hesitation? Is it the wildness? Because you never quite felt the same wildness with Garland. I'm trying to figure out where the dissonance is. What's the difference between the expectations between those two guys?
I think part of it is that Garland got hurt early in his season and there wasn't more tape to pick nits over. I think that is a big part of it for, Garland at Vanderbilt. I think also, even just in 2019, there was not the hyper obsession with wings as there is now. And so when you had someone who was clearly like an NBA point guard and could run a team, that I think carried a little bit more weight then than it does now. But I can tell you, I'm not hesitating to put Dillingham in the top 10. Like, wherever this draft lands, I'm not going to find 10 guys whose games I like more than Dillingham's. That's not going to happen. Um, but since you're speaking about a hesitation, before we segue to Reed Sheppard, because I want to know who you like more as a pro prospect out of those two guys. What is if you do you think that there is a big likelihood, if you had to say that it is more likely for Rob Dillingham to be a starting point guard, which means they rely on his offense a lot, probably as a top two option on a team, or that he is in more of the Monk mold of, a sixth man who can close some games? Which do you think is more likely and why?
Oh man. I would lean towards the latter. Um, I guess you kind of got to ask yourself, well, what is every like consistent volume, primary option, hub, whatever you want to call it. Usually you want your superstar to be a bit of a hub and sort of like flip what they pull into playmaking that serves your offense, right?
Yeah.
We know he's not big enough to be like a Helio guy. Even if
Right.
the whole Helio conversation itself, I think, is wobbly these days. But I think it's more likely. Let me answer my own question before I do that. Where would his dribble pull up shooting? I think he has the potential to become pretty damn good. I've been curious to talk with like some shooting coaches to see what they think about his leg drift. That's always
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm curious with shooters. It can vary. Some guys can get away with a lot of leg drift and they're fine. Some people need to fix it. Um, I think that he has the potential to become, a pretty good NBA shooter. I'm not sure about elite. Um, Other than that, I mean, he seems like he could develop some great middle game. Um, I'm just trying to think of the NBA offenses that are driven that, a guy his size. How many of them can you think of right now? I mean, obviously Trey, and he's Helio. Like I said, wobbly. People are a little out of love with that.
Nice little Colin Sexton resurgence playing alongside Markkinen in Utah.
Yeah,
Speaking of SEC guards past, but
yeah.
he's a more
But
of
not
an
nearly the passer Rob is, right?
right,
Yeah.
not nearly, but Colin is an efficient scorer. He, more like bursty, strong driver than Rob is, goes about it a different way. But I don't know. Like, I think, ugh, Quickly has looked really good alongside Barnes, and it just depends on how much you think Rob has to make up for the lack of wingspan, because that is a big part of Quickly's game on both sides of the ball, both in his ability to draw fouls and in his ability to like be a very solid defender for someone who's a little shorter. Um, but I don't know. I think if he is to be a sixth man, he's going to be an excellent sixth man, at least in the regular season. And I wonder how his feel for the game will prop him up, the degree to which it could prop him up on defense. Like Tyrese Halliburton is not a good defender by most metrics, even though he like leads the league in steals. And
Right.
he is never going to be counted on as one of the better guard defenders in the league, but it's all about, the balance and what you bring to the table and all that stuff. So how sort of how bad do you think Rob's defense is going to be? How much do you think he can sort of glue and duct tape together?
I think he's going to have to. I thought this whole Kentucky team is going to have to lean towards, calculated disruption, I think would be a word I would use.
Sure.
Um, they're gonna guerrilla kind of mindset where we're gonna fight in an unorthodox style because we know if we hang back and man to man, you guys, not in the literal sense, but like in the schematic sense, but they're going to have their issues just because they're skinny. I don't know how big Rob is ever going to get. I don't know if he's ever really going to be able to contain ball pressure. He's probably always going to have to be probably a helper because teams are going to take him to the weight room. I don't see any way around that. And you even look at some of the great, the offensive kind of guard duos in the league, and no one is exempt from being taken to the weight room, I would say. So Rob
Right.
is definitely going to be at risk of that. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious about the offense. I'm looking here at 58% finisher. Most of the stuff that he is getting and taking at this point, he really likes the top of the key. He really likes the elbow range. When he takes, but honestly, his shot diet is pretty spaced out.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pull up his. I want to make sure that I get this right. Let's see. I had the two of them pulled up next to each other, but I want to get his dribble pull up number just in front of me here. Um, we knew he was a pretty talented dribble shooter, and he's been good. Let's see, from three this year, well, 33.3, but 44.8 overall. A lot of those are kind of in the mid range.
Mm-hmm.
I trust his touch. Like, I don't know. I feel like I wrote a little bit about this summer because I was kind of defending Nick Smith, and I was like, I kind of just I feel like it's gonna click at some point in a way that it did with Monk, similar. I'd seen so much of him that I just kind of came to believe that. There is a place for these types of guys. Nick's even a little bit bigger than Rob, also. Um, it's sort of the I'm trying to think of what the comparison was that I made, but with these sort of fulcrum elbow creator guys, you mentioned like a guy who can just set like bone crushing screens. There is a place for a Rob to work. So
Yeah.
um, I feel like my skepticism on him has honestly just free fallen since the fall. I was really worried about him, honestly, before he got. I knew he was talented, but he's definitely won me over, man. Specific the passing and the stuff you talked about has really been the thing that's flipped it for me. So I think he'll bring value on that front. I really do.
Yeah, I do too. And so let's transition though to Mr. Sheppard, who in a different way is also very polarizing as a prospect. Sort of not quite an inverse, because Reed is also a very good shooter in his own right, a very good passer in his own right. But uh I'll just give you the floor on Reed. You talk to me about Reed Sheppard and the different ways you think that he will help an NBA team, and who he reminds you of, if anyone, as a one and done prospect.
Oh man, in terms of a one and done prospect, he's
Yeah, not easy to find a comp.
who even is comparable. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking down through here, I'm really just going by the guys that are in the league right now. I don't know. I'm gonna have to probably deliberate a little more on this one, honestly. I don't know that I have one because he is unique. People
Yeah.
have wanted to pull out the white guy to white guy stuff, but I don't really know that there's one that satisfies me on that front. What you just want me to kind of give my thoughts on him, or what were you looking
I
for in
do.
this initial?
I'll do a better job as a host to say that
No, you're good.
Reed is shooting 58% from the field, 54% from three. Has a block rate of 3.5 and a steal rate of 5. These are all, basically Banana Town numbers. You just don't see them in the same package for anyone. The block rate and steal rate in particular is sort of reminiscent of like what Tari Eason did at LSU. And Tari Eason is this giant power wing who is, the strongest guy in his class, pound for pound. Reed, I think there is a little bit of Alex Caruso, if you want to do the white guy to white guy thing, in terms of the timing on his hands
That's a
to
good one. I
to
like that one.
disrupt both on the ball and also to contest on jump shots without having exceptional length. That's very, very good. But Caruso was not near the shooter that Reed has been as a freshman player. But the tension with Reed to me is just the traditional draft theory, at least to me, is that at the very top, because you won't find a freshman that has a better like numbers profile than Reed. He will be the best freshman in the country when the year is done, when you start looking at whatever numbers, whether you call them advanced analytics or just does the ball go into the hoop and how frequently does it do so.
Yeah.
So like Reed will stand by himself. The question is more uh traditionally the best players in every draft, top 3 or 4, are ones that drive a lot of offense, where the reason they are good, the reason they return the value that they do is because an NBA offense in an era of offensive explosion and arms race can say, we can rely on you to sort of take us to the promised land of top 10, top 15 NBA offense, and then we can surround you with spacing and everything else. Reed is such a connector on this Kentucky team. I mean, his usage is only around like 18. And I think
Pretty
Dillingham,
insane. If you compare it, yeah, 17 is what I'm seeing, which is 33rd percentile. But if you look at his other, like, yeah, his profile is honestly unprecedented. Like,
yeah.
he's 95th or higher percentile wise in blocks, in personal foul efficiency, and steal percentage, 3-point percentage, true shooting percentage, percentage, assist to ratio, assist to turnover, assist to usage. He's 95th or higher in all of those
Do you
categories.
know offhand, this was going into tonight, so I don't know, but do you know going into tonight what Kentucky's offensive rating was when Reed was on the floor?
Do you know that number? Well,
Yeah.
tell me, what is it?
138
Jesus
in
Christ.
in the
Well,
college game.
let me tell you what's wild about that though. The wild thing, whenever I'm talking to like, NBA people about this, or just whoever is, you mentioned him as a connector for somebody who the places he enters the offense on the floor from, for him to operate as a fish, it's a little bizarre, honestly, because he's not, if you compare to what Rob is doing, they are very interesting sides of the coin, where Rob is like very much, he doesn't stand on the bank and watch he gets the line in the water immediately. He's like, let's go fishing, let's go. And like
Yep, yep, yep.
he gets stuff moving. Reed is very much the guy who, like, after that first, I thought coming into the year that Rob would be the guy who would be like second, third side. He's going to just crush somebody, but he's been very good at the point of attack, breaking people down. Reed is more, you come off that pick and roll, he catches it, he's going. He's never, my overall point, I guess, is just that, like, there are a lot of layers to his passing ability that have yet even to be peeled back, and he's having this kind of impact, which is insane. So, like,
Hmm.
it's like his threshold for per 100 just making the right choice. I always said this about Steph Curry, not comparing the two things, but like one of the things about Steph was just that, like, Steph could just drown you with choices, and he's going
Mhm.
to make more good ones than you per 100. He may not
Mhm.
overpower you. He may not, but he's going to just destroy his, guarding him is like putting your hand in the pain box from Dune, basically. It's just like, it's pain. And like, that's how he mentally destroys you with that
Yeah.
stuff. And Reed is different though. It's like, it's an interesting conversation to think about like what would happen if he did get more aggressive. I think because we have seen, what we've seen has had kind of really kind of defined parameters what he's chosen to do. Like I said, like he'll catch it off a handoff and go, and he makes the right connective pass. What percentage of the time? It's high.
Whatever.
Uh,
They're all high 90s. It's
yeah,
all, does
it's
he do this well? The answer is yes. So, but like that's the question about how much value will he return to a team. It's like when I watch him, if you show him a body, whether that's him cutting or that's him trying to attack, if he takes two dribbles and there's a body still in front of him, then he's like, I'm just going to get rid of the
he
ball.
gets
Why would I
off it.
hold on to the ball? This is
Yeah.
not an efficient decision. I know it's not. I can relocate and hurt people other ways. So doop, there we go.
Where it's just
And
Rob sometimes can be like, I'll put five in front of me. He's been better about that, but you're right about Reed. He gets off it. He doesn't really. I think Kentucky fans want him sometimes, especially in like 1-on-1 or 1-on-1.5. They want to see him give that little extra thing, and he really hasn't done it, which is probably partly why he's so efficient. Not to downgrade it, but it's people
yeah, and
people are begging him to do a little bit more just because they want to see it. I think.
but I don't think it's just a matter of his preference. I think he certainly does prefer to play that way because he never plays out of control. He plays exactly the way that he wants to. But just to compare to Steph, and when you have crazy numbers, I think comparisons like that are at least helpful to talk yourself through. Steph, first of all, bigger guy, better burst, bigger wingspan, like slipperier handle. Like he could get to the cup anytime he wanted. And he
Mhm.
was as heliocentric as it could ever get playing at Davidson, operating from the top of the key and just going. So,
Sort of an inversion of Helio, though. Well, yeah. I'm not trying not to
at
pick
least
a
in
bone
terms of
there, but it's
usage,
yeah. I mean, he's
yeah, yeah.
it's sort of the inversion thing. It's the I always joked and called it anti-usage. It was like he was dominating the game away, whether he had it in his
Right.
hands or not, right, with the off-ball stuff. But yeah,
But
that's a digression. But
even off the ball, I don't see Reed or on the ball. He does not just through his physical movement create tons of space. And I think that's why he dishes off so much. It's not as though he puts some nasty crossover on someone, takes one dribble in and dishes it out. And people are like, oh no, you had him. Why wouldn't you just it's more that just to me doesn't look like his bag. And on the very few occasions that I've seen him look uncomfortable, it's when he's tried to get to the rack and someone is just sticking with him and he realizes like, well, I can try to rise up over him, but he doesn't jump very high and his
mhm.
wingspan isn't very large. And that's the only time where he really looks ordinary is when he tries to finish a play in a way that is sort of against his own ethics or principles when he tries to finish it in the way of traditional NBA draft prospect would to be like, let me just show you how I can physically just do things that my opponents cannot.
Yeah,
So,
like shot creation wise,
yeah,
you're right, and I think that's the frontier of his game that's really unexplored, and why he might come back. Honestly, we can have that conversation, but we saw specifically speaking to what you're talking about, the exact types of plays where I've seen it happen is he turns the corner, basically dribbles off, maybe the guy's attached to him usually or whatever it is. Gets into the sort of the foul line lower slot area and the guy's with him and he kind of gets in this like dead end spot it looks unusual for him because you just don't see it very much.
right.
um and
Yeah.
you see him kind of like try to pass out of those situations. That's kind of normal for handlers his size to do. A lot of especially guys who like grow up scorers, they definitely have to go through this mental process. I've noticed this pattern over the years of guys. Garland went through this. Scoot's going through this right now to some tough degree. Just guys that are used to scoring when they turn that corner, and they're like, Keontae is really going through it right now.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to either A, keep your dribble alive or get off it sooner, identify those situations when they're going to arise and just get off it sooner. Um, maybe it's a flip thing where we should be giving Reed credit for identifying it sooner, like you were talking about. And how much should we penalize him for the fact that he's not getting it? Like what percentage of guards who are going to play his position are going to be looking to take that shot? We've seen him turn the corner and just pull up early and take that shot, and
Yes.
he can hit it. Like he really can hit it. But I guess that's kind of the conversation I'm having with myself, and maybe that's a way of kind of defining his ceiling a little bit too. You know,
Well,
is
the
that
play
necessarily a bad thing? You know, if he shoots it well enough and passes it well enough, it may not end up mattering that he doesn't take those types of shots.
Well, and the recent player who's come through the draft who had similarly just crazy efficient numbers across the board as a freshman, but on microscopic usage, did come back for his second year and then was drafted to the Kings, and that was Halliburton. Because
Hmm.
Halliburton played primarily off the ball for Iowa State as a freshman. I think his usage was like 15. Made everything he took, but it was still relatively low volume. And then the question, even as a sophomore, was how he could create in ISO and how that would manifest itself in the league. Very quickly in the league, you saw that he added that sort of sidestep three, and that was sort of how that was his first sort of level of threat of scoring the teams really had to respect. And then his feel took over after all of that, and getting into space, he could do his thing. I think my main question with Reed is that even Halliburton, who is someone who will always be skinny and has always been identified as someone who isn't like terribly physically blessed, still is like 6'5", 6'8" wingspan, and can cover like with the ball in his hands, he can cover ground in a quick amount of time. He may need the right sort of lane in which to do so, but like long strides and just can he never struck me as seeming like the NBA game would move too quickly or too suddenly for
Yeah.
him. And that's more my question with like Reed's going to be a good NBA player. I don't mean to say that he could wash out, but in terms of trying to find a theory of his stardom, I think that Halliburton is a good sort of pivot point
Hmm.
because if there's a way for him to sustain at higher usage, I think he would have to succeed in some of the similar ways. And it's just a matter of, well, where is his sort of skeleton key in the same way that Halliburton's sidestep was for him? It might be that he just starts pulling up from 30 and raining it down, and you get high pick and roll from really far out, and then he gets downhill and starts doing his stuff. But do you think there is a level of offense, maybe not Halliburton level, because Halliburton is incredible now, but like an all-star level offensive player in there? Do you think that there's a way for him to maybe find that at the pro level?
All star, as I was talking with somebody about this the other day, it's like all star when I was growing up, I feel like I had such a clear idea of what it meant. These days, there's just so much talent that I'm like, they're not an all star. And then I'm like, they are an all star. And I was
Yeah.
very not necessarily about being wrong. It's just that like um the talent just is so wide that there are more people that I think are candidates. Whereas in the past, I felt like it was kind of like there was like a much smaller pool of players
Yeah,
who were
of
more
course.
likely,
That's why I ask it instead of all NBA. I think it's
yeah,
unfair to ask that about Reed now. But all
right.
star, I can that's
I think either I froze up or
usually like were you one of the year? That's usually what it is because you have 24, six drop out, six get selected. It usually gets around 30. That's
yeah.
sort of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. If I were to pick one, we had the same conversation about Rob. We'll just kind of do it, parallel here. I feel like he could become a pretty good, initiator. You use him, you come up, you get the ball where it needs to go. A relocating shooter. I would not put a cap on what he could become as a shooter. Like I really think that I don't have any like he's a very talented shooter. Now, we don't see a ton. A lot of his shots are sort of like stepping in. I always really kind of try to pay attention directionality with guys and the types of looks that they take. We haven't seen him do a ton of stepping back. Of course, that's kind of the self-creating stuff, which would sort of like run against his nature, as we were talking about. He doesn't think
Yeah.
like that. He's not thinking that. Rob absolutely would do that and has done that, and will do it even more. But if you're looking at him, yeah, I mean that's the thing that makes the most sense to me. I think that like left and right, I'm confident about him shooting the ball. I could see him coming off a pin down. I could see him being a screener, and you know, and that's a fun idea. Having him run with a bigger
Yeah,
player, having him as a screener.
absolutely.
I'm always excited about those possibilities. But that's that's kind of just that's the start of it. I'm trying to like think of just sort of the class of guard that I expect him to be in. I'm like, is he going to be in that like Alvarado kind of range where like he's just going to be sort of like a seventh or eighth guy for a team
No,
that
he can be
everybody's in
better than
love
that.
with?
He can be
Uh,
better than that. Yeah.
and then you start thinking about,
I
you
would
know,
think about sort of Derek White, kind of maybe. White, again,
White.
better physical dimensions, but White also didn't enter the league until he was 22.
Yeah.
Another guy who had really great hand placement, always has. But this is where sort of Reed's shot volume and his proficiency. I mean, Derek was a good shooter at Colorado before he came into the league, but like he's just not Reed, not what Reed's
Well,
doing.
you talk
So
about you're stacking plus dribble containment, you know, great spacer, secondary playmaker. That's that right there. That's enough. I've heard it. I've heard enough. Send it off, print it. With Reed, it's like he does struggle a little bit with containment. It was surprisingly for his talent in his anticipation, in his hands and things like that. I would say some of his techniques. I can just tell you, if you're following me on Twitter and you're listening to this, you're gonna get 2 or 3 superlative kind of retweets from me a game. And he's gonna do something where I'm just like, he's the best at this micro skill that I've seen at UK. Like inbounds passer, probably the best inbounds passer I've ever seen at Kentucky. Best post digging technique. I said this earlier in the year. Nobody better. Anticipating where the ball's gonna be. His just like proprioception, his court mapping. I know those are two just very like Winnie the Pooh in a tux kind of terms that you hear from
no,
draft
we're
people,
we're
but
deep
like,
enough into the podcast. It's the right time to bust him out. That's good.
but he's really really off the charts. Now, if he's disruptive on that level and it sort of eases some of that stuff, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm not trying to come off as more skeptical than you. I guess I'm just kind of this is what I do, is I kind of start from there and work my way back instead of I try not to get too out of control with him, but it happens. But that's kind of where I am with him. I'm like, Peyton Pritchard is a name I've heard people bring up, but even Peyton was a little more of a like break you down style.
Yeah.
And Reed is much more disruptive defender. Their timelines, I guess, would be interesting to put against each other. But I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what class of guard he's in, honestly, in the NBA.
That's the question, man. And I don't have an easy answer. I'll put cards on the table and say that when we started this discussion, in my mind, I haven't done a board per se. I have one that changes all the time, but I liked Dillingham better than Reed as a prospect when we started talking. I don't know if I feel that way right now, but that's what January's for. So
Hmm.
like I I don't want to say that because it's hard to imagine. I guess I will say it is hard to imagine Reed operating at volume because at a core level, I don't think he wants to operate at volume. And that's a big underrated thing in the draft. The guys who end up with monster usage in the NBA are guys who at some level want to have monster usage in the
They
NBA.
charge towards that, yeah, for sure. I don't
So
think, I think
because
you're right about that.
if you're reluctant to do it, if it's not in your nature, believe me, it's in someone else's, and so that is what happens. So at that level, I don't think that Reed is going to be a Halliburton because even though Halliburton went back and started out low usage, you saw that that is what he wanted to be. And unless there's something about Reed that I don't know about how maybe he's really frustrated and he wants to run a lot more pick and roll. I just kind of don't get that vibe in watching him. So
Yeah. I think we
if
can finish your thought. I'm
so,
sorry.
I'm just saying if that's off the table and you have to sort of imagine this other path for him, maybe a White it somewhere on a scale of Alex Caruso to Derek White or something. That's still really, really good. But I also think that there is a cap as to how much value you're really going to add, because you're still, no matter how good you are at all these different things, like you play Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, he's still gonna abuse you. I mean, it's still gonna
Hmm.
happen. So, and I'm not comfortable saying that Reed is gonna lock people down at that level, because I don't think he would. So that's sort of where the ultimate question lies: is how valuable is a player who thrives on a little bit lower usage, mid-tier kind of usage, and where you can do a lot of really good things, inverted pick and rolls, spacing like crazy. That's my question with him. I guess is sort of but you wanted to have a thought. I should have let you go as the
No,
host
no,
here, I
I
guess.
was just gonna jump off of what you were talking about in terms of the like figuring out if he's a primary. It's just that job market has kind of drawn its own parameters where it's like I always think about it like this, if you're looking at the scout for the guys who are primaries, they always have a like we have to we have you were talking about charging hard towards big usage. It usually is driven by a skill set that's going to become elite. It's just like we have to stop this guy from doing this or he will do it. It's not
Right.
like it's like we got to keep Giannis, we got to keep Shea out of the paint. They're going to do it, and then everything ripples from that. We got to stop, we got to make Steph's life harder, whether it be top blocking, switching, whatever like we got it trapping him at opportune times. Like each of those elite guys kind of have that. We got to keep Kawhi or Durant away from their spots. What is that? What would that be for Reed other than like turning the corner? Like he has shown, I always call it like shooting in the phone booth. Like he's very
Yeah.
comfortable shooting with people attached to him. He has shown that. So that's a good thing. If you're looking at a pretty highly qualified secondary creator who is going to space, who's going to give you a lot of connective passing, who's going to be disruptive defensively. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to become some fan base's favorite player next year if he decides to go or whenever it is, because he just does. He's such a low waist player, man. It's really incredible to watch, especially considering the talent he played with in high school. Even people here who watched him and have watched him, we've known about Reed since he was like a little kid. Like that's how like a much of a like Harry Potter, like this is the boy. Like people have known about Reed for a long time because his dad was a legend here, man, and his mom was good too. And he grew up here in the state. They decided to stay, and people were like aware of him. And I think even still it's like rocked people how good he is. It's kind of a phenomenal, bizarre thing. To be
Yeah.
honest with you,
In that A&M game, the commentator was like, it wouldn't surprise me in 30, 35 years if Reed Sheppard was the head coach of the University of
that was
Kentucky.
pretty wild.
And I was like, come on, guys, can we just, and like, just to illustrate, and it can be from a number of different biases that Reed gets the benefit of the doubt, not the least of which is the fact that he is a low waist player. Like he has earned a reputation of doing the right thing and avoiding fouls and all this. But there might be other biases at play. We don't necessarily need to name them. But in that A&M game, I believe that God, there was a play, either I can't remember if it was in overtime or if it was in regulation, but it was right near the end where Tyrese Radford, he was guarding him. Radford does a step back three, looks like it's a 4-point play because it goes in and Radford goes to the ground. The crazy crowd's going nuts, and they call an offensive foul on him for kicking out his legs into Sheppard, who had gone to the court or gone to the ground after. And to me, that was a ticky tack call, especially since Dillingham had one earlier in the game that had
Hmm.
messed up Solomon Washington, who I don't know that we'll get to in this episode. He's a fun prospect, and that had gone uncalled. This one gets called offensive foul. They take three off the board. They go down to the other end. Reed shoots a three, and then they call a landing space foul, and he gets 3 free throws. And
I didn't
it's
even
not as
think
though he,
about that, but yeah, I mean, I see what you're going at, and it's not. I don't think you're crazy. Like that is
right?
funny now to think about. It's like
Yeah, and I'm not,
I
I'm
didn't
not,
even think about that,
I
but
don't
yeah.
think Reed did anything wrong on his shot. I don't think he should have gotten called for an offensive foul, but it was just like a little microcosm of like
It's a
people,
Battier Leitner kind of a thing where you're just like they're
right?
always their slugging percentage for being in the right place, and they just have this like I don't know what it is. Maybe that is a bias, like you were talking about. It's very possible. I wouldn't rule that out.
But talk to me about why. And so, like, when he's like that, sorry, that was a digression, but I just had that in my mind. But the commentator saying, I think he could be the head coach and whatever. I was just like, can we please just like let him play, enjoy that he's playing, and leave all that noise out of there? But because of NIL and because of how much Kentucky obviously loves him, there is this thought that he could come back. But what, like, I guess what would his NBA intel have to be? Like, how bad would it have to be to force him to decide that Kentucky as a sophomore was a more attractive option? Because I cannot imagine that he will not get a top 20 guarantee from someone. So, is that, you really think that that is not a good enough guarantee to have him go pro?
Oh, you were saying how bad? Yeah, I was gonna say
Or view it the
it would
other
have
way.
to be how
Like,
good. Yeah,
yeah.
like it would have to like because I think that's way more likely. I don't think that he's dead set on it for sure. I think it would have to be something that would maybe alter what the way he was thinking about it. The intel that I've gotten from a pretty decent source is just that the conversations happening around him are sort of geared toward like don't rush through this time that he's in. You know what I mean? Like that they're not in a hurry. Um, a lot of that is separate
Okay.
from the logic of should you not for other people. I think because I do think that he is like an exceptionally marketable like asset here. He stands to potentially make more money than anybody ever has. Honestly, as an NIL, you know, we're talking above the table stuff here. But
More than
I
Sheboy?
he's yeah. So there, that's a factor. Also, I mean, I guess it becomes a question of you have to weigh this draft and who's there
Right.
based on the kind of guarantee he would get versus the things we talked about. Would he want to develop the things that we talked about, like the pushing the usage, pushing the like, okay, what's your sort of top of the call sheet thing that they have to stop, growing that, marketing yourself to an NBA team and maybe moving up and getting more guaranteed money or doing that this year and going and working on that next year with an NBA team. People always underestimate that. They're like, well, you know, they always look at development like it just happens in college, which is just a very like college fan mindset a lot of the time. But yeah, that's what he's going to be weighing. I mean, yeah, if he's a top 20 pick, it's hard to say, man. I think if he's in the 20s, I think it's definitely in the air that he could come back. And like if he's in the 10s, um you know, 10 seems like it would be pretty hard to say no to. You know, if he comes back next year, tears his Achilles or something, you know, it's like that seems like a cataclysmic the guy's never gonna have a heart. He's set for life already here. So I don't think that's kind of a problem. But
Or if he makes merely 37% of his threes rather than 47, which is where he'll
merely
like, where he'll end up this time. I just, because like his, I don't want to call it novelty, but his uniqueness is I think a real asset for him in this draft, just because people are looking for anything to like value at a really high level, and he certainly has that. But if that starts to wear just a little bit, then it's going to, very quickly be, well, he's 6'3" and he's not a mega athlete, and how many of those in the league, like it'll just, not to the point where he won't get drafted, but
hmm
he'll go from potential top 10 pick in this draft, which I think he is in terms of just intersection of youth and productivity, and like who knows where the hell it goes in the league, but you want to bet on that. he would go from that to potentially being in the 20s in next year's class as like a sophomore with, Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey and all, a more traditional top one and done class.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not here to advise him, obviously. And like it is unique to be the chosen one for such a, storied program. But I would have to think that he goes. I would have to, but I don't know. I don't. So
It's a pretty unique situation. I mean, he's a unique player, and it's creating. There are a couple things that I think are weighing out here too. Is that to think about is how much do we think that he could potentially regress? Do we think that that's and also like the likelihood of that? I don't feel. I guess that would come down to gun to your head if you thought that like how much of this was aberrational or like over this sample size. I think skeptics have gotten really quiet. I think this is really real. Like on a team, and I don't
yeah.
expect him to like plummet to 37, but which is funny to say even out loud as I was saying it. But the other thing too is that like I guess you would be thinking about when it comes to his draft position, would people's perception of like how they think about him at the NBA level change if his role next year is a lot more primary? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that necessarily. I don't know that people would ding him for that so as much because I feel like with this team, his role is probably simulating to a decent extent what he would be like at the next level. I feel like well you're making a face. Do you agree? I mean, it's
Sorry.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
mean
yeah.
to.
I'm
I don't mean to.
curious. No, I want to hear what you think about it. Yeah.
I think it can. I mean, this is the Halliburton question: is just how much is he comfortable with? How much does he want to push the limits of his offensive talent? If he wants to push it, then it is hard for me to sit here and put a limit on how good he can be, because that's always sort of a fool's errand in draft work. If you say, well, this guy's like clearly very good relative to everyone he plays, and he's always a step ahead. But like for reasons A, B, and C, rank him 16th. That usually never works out. The last time I felt like that was happening, including by me, was with Jalen Williams, with Santa Clara. And not that he was a one and done, because he wasn't, but you look back, the boxes were checked for him, and now you see what he's
Glad you're saying
doing.
this. I'm glad you're saying this.
But like
I
that,
kind of interrupted you, but go ahead. Yeah.
but like that, I mean, one of the reasons I love this work so much is that despite whatever fake conflict there is between like eye test and analytics or whatever, if you have a really good NBA player and you go back and look at what they were, it's all there like 95 plus percent of the time. It
Hmm.
might be there in an unconventional way, but it's not as though it pops up out of nowhere, which is why calling the draft a crapshoot, to me, was always silly. That's part of where my name comes from, because I think that it can be done in a more accurate way. But as applied to Reed, like I just I think it depends very much on what he himself, how he sees himself as a player and how he is wired as a player, which is what we already talked about. And if he wants to start coming to Kentucky next year and shooting off the dribble from 30 feet and seeing how much he can stress the defense doing that, if Cal will let him, then sure. But if he doesn't think that that is the right way to play basketball, and that's sort of how I think he is,
Hmm.
that's where I sort of, still unique, still awesome, still a clear lottery pick, but that's where I'm like, how valuable, what is the limit to that value? That's all.
Yeah, you're talking about him pulling up. I'll believe that one when I see it in terms of Cal letting him do that. But the
Right.
the directional thing
That's
is
another
something.
thing. Yeah.
He has kind of like clean, kind of like forwards backwards kind of mechanic. Like you don't see a lot of the like looseness with him like interrupting a movement pattern to the left or the right. Like
Right.
I'll believe that when I see it. But what you're saying is a problem. Might have to be my last thing because I'll have to roll here in a little bit. But what you're saying is something that has been on my mind a lot lately because of Reed. And I won't throw these people under the bus. They're my dear friends, but I was having a conversation with some Kentucky people about this. And they were like, Reed just doesn't look like the type of guy you would take at that spot. And I was just like, you guys realize that like and this is like this
Yeah,
is
I mean,
circling to something that I've been thinking about because I was writing a lot about Jaquez and I'm working on a video about Jaquez right now and
oh, good.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking about like the I always make this point that like in the 5 to 12 range, almost every single year, I need to do a study of this more specifically, but we people who have a top 10 pick, they see that single digit next to their pick number and they think we need to take this type of player, a
Hmm.
certain type of player. We're going to bet on athleticism that maybe we're praying like hell that it'll line up with their feel and something down the road. We'll make a bet on that, the hit percentage really low. And then you'll see in like the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 range, oh, lo and behold, an all-star was sitting there. Shea, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, or, like it happens every single Jalen Williams, Tyrese Halliburton, over and over and over and over again. We make this mistake. And I don't know what it's going to take for people not to do that. Like when they have the opportunity to take somebody and you look at a guy like Reed feels prime for this. Like it really does. Like whether or not he's going to go to the all-star level, I don't know, but he definitely feels like somebody um he definitely feels like somebody who is going to be undervalued and maybe even I'm fighting even within myself a little bit because when you say top 10, I'm like, golly, like, is he really top 10? It's like,
I
it's
mean,
hard to like snap out of it even almost. Yeah.
would Podchemsky be top 10 in a, I mean, I don't want to do the redraft thing, but that, I mean, very productive, lots of different
He's in the top
areas
10 of
in
my
which
rookie rankings, so like,
there you go.
fits with an NBA team right now, like immediately interface with an NBA team with his skill set, which we should have seen coming. I mean, the defense thing I still worry about with him. I always
So do
have,
I. Yeah.
but
And I had him, I think, like 15th or 16th. Like again, like liked him, but the thing is you don't, I think how I apply it, and this is just like how I make mistakes doing this stuff, is that I want to find the I want to be optimistic on players. Even if I'm
yeah.
not ultimately, you
Mhm.
want to be. You don't want to write off a 19-year-old and say like so if there is a theory for a player where you're like, I can see how this would work, and they happen to have that athleticism, then I think that is more of a like booster to where they ultimately get ranked on a lot of these boards. Whereas, we probably could benefit from just saying like the booster should be the productivity always, 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 always. And then start to say, who are the five most productive players in college basketball this year who are, I don't know, 20 years older and younger. If you want to start dinging for athleticism concerns, frame concerns, do that. But as long as you start with them high and move them down a little bit, you'll probably end up better than if you start him at, well, I'll take him number 25 and then force yourself to move him up.
Yeah.
That's probably how it would work for me.
I think that's pretty fair. I like that. Yeah, Shingun's another one that
Yeah.
what were we thinking there? It's just like it's perennial underrating the things like them playing basketball and it's like overrating the things like measurables like combine stations, things like that, discussions like that. It's the draft weeds that I've been prone and still prone to fall into at times, but like guys that can play basketball. It's I don't want to oversimplify here, but it just seems to keep happening again and again. So
Yeah. And before I let you go, who do you like better as a prospect out of Reed and Rob? Let me ask.
they're not going to be the same type of outcome, I don't think. So it's a tricky thing to
It yeah.
like Reed. I could see, I use that word interface again. I see him interfacing with a functioning team quickly. Like if Reed went to a team that's already working, you could see him carving out a spot for himself. Rob, I guess you're just kind of weighing the sort of temptation to be wasteful of Rob versus like the trying to prod Reed to maybe be more aggressive and enter a space where he might risk being more wasteful. That's kind of they sort of meet in this interesting way, don't they? So it's kind of like, are you gonna? I would lean towards Rob, because his just creation skills are so wild, are very very strong. Um,
Mhm.
that's where I would lean right now, but it could be the case that Reed's floor is just so solid that he ends up having less sort of variance in his career and ends up doing better than Rob. But I think Rob's tools are just their variance. I think have the potential to climb higher potentially.
It'll be interesting to see because I imagine very early in their careers, the NBA will expand to 32 teams. And so all of this
Was that
conversation about
gobbledygook what I said? Sorry. I mean, was that or like I always trying to be
no.
non-committal. I'm tilted a little towards Rob right now. I just
Yeah,
wanted
no,
to
no,
make sure I
no.
answered your question.
I
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
with you. I'm with you.
No, I just
No,
not necessarily jargony in a way that was hard. I just wanted to make sure I was like answering because I do that. So I'll walk around a question sometimes, even inadvertently, like a politician. I wanted to make sure I had an answer. I would lean Rob simply. There we go. Yeah.
in many ways, this entire podcast is a nice stroll around whatever question I started with. So this was lovely. No, I would say that once the league expands, whether that's in 2 years or 4 years or whatever, it'll happen when these two are still relatively early in their careers, I would imagine. And when that talent dilutes a little bit, then I could see Rob's skill set becoming more valuable because that's the default, right? It's like you want to look for that offensive creation. That's what we've been discussing. But the league as it stands now, where there are wing creators on like the easy majority of teams, to your point, I can see why some teams prefer Reed. And the caution in taking Rob to me is that even though I love his skill set and I think it's really good, you know, he's gonna have to beat Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, or he's gonna have to beat, in some cases, Garland or Donovan Mitchell or all these other guards who play at volume. It's just really hard to bet on him not just sticking but using his skill set to beat other people who are really good at similar things that he does.
That's a
If you
good
want
point.
to if you want to make a case for Reed, which is I guess where I'm at the end of this discussion, it's that he won't have that same issue. His connectivity or his connecting skills are so extreme that you could easily see him excelling where other similar players fail to the point where he is catapulting his team in a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
So that's probably where I lie with it now. Is like I guess I slightly prefer Reed. I consider them both basically, top 10 talents. So
Yeah. It's a really, really interesting situation. Like in terms of these two guys, not just for Kentucky, just these two guys being on the same team. Like I
coming
can't
off the
really
bench.
I really can't remember. We didn't even get to Edwards, but yeah, like that's
Yeah.
another conversation, but or maybe not a conversation to be honest with you.
Well,
So
Kyle, I'm here, man. Whenever you want to run it back, I'm here. I'm here.
maybe we'll circle
Um,
back sometime. Yeah.
what should people look forward to from you immediately? When is that Hawkes video coming out?
I'm gonna try to have that out next week. So I kind of talk a little bit about influences in his game, and it's a little snappier of a video, but yeah, just talking about the little micro things about him that make him great. So that's what I'm doing.
All right. Thank you very much, Kyle Mann, the Ringer. Thank you so much for your time. Thank y'all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.